All right, back on the Young Turks. I'm your host, Cenk, and we're going to talk to an interesting guest here, conservative commentator Joy Tiz. She's written about the Fort Hood shootings. One of the articles is called The Grand Deception, Jihadis Among Us, and the other is called Massacred by Political Correctness. Joy, welcome to the Young Turks.
Hi, thank you for having me.
No problem. First, let's talk about Massacred by Political Correctness.
Yeah.
Tell me why you think political correctness led to what happened before.
Well, I think there were a lot of warning signs that Hassan was a jihadi among us, and the military would look the other way because they were basically told to look the other way. In fact, there was a quote from the FBI saying that we would be crucified if we brought this to anybody's attention because he is Muslim. It's another one of those protected groups.
Okay, I have not seen that quote, but let's break down why you think that, what were the warning signs, right? So now on the program we've already talked about, he said he was sympathetic to suicide bombers. That's an enormous warning sign, right? And he said that he had great sympathy for the cleric that's now used to be in the country and had preached to the 9/11 bombers and now is in Yemen. And that guy's a radical extremist. And if he's saying he's sympathetic to his views, that's an enormous warning sign.
Well, there were 20 emails back and forth.
Right. So, now, Joy, those are clear warning signs, and for whatever reason, there's no explanation, if they knew about it. And now I know the CIA is claiming to CBS News that they didn't. I don't know if that's true or untrue, right? And everybody's got an excuse, and maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong. If they ignored those, then we're, of course, in agreement that that's outrageous. You shouldn't ignore those no matter what the guy believes, right?
Right.
But is there anything else? I mean, because if you ignored warning signs from Scott Roeder before he was about to kill the abortion doctor, that would have been unconscionable either. I mean, is there anything about him being Muslim that makes this any different?
Yes. I think when he gave his little lecture at Walter Reed before he was transferred hastily to Fort Hood to get him out of Walter Reed's hair, and he told everybody that he was supposed to be giving a lecture on some medical topic, and he went off on a tangent about Islam and made a statement to the effect that infidels should have their heads sawed off and boiling oil poured down their throats. I think that should have been a tip-off that this is a little bit more than your everyday workplace shooting.
No, I couldn't agree more with you. So, but again, if a Christian or anyone else had made a speech like that, then if Tim McVeigh, was a veteran.
Wants to do that. Go back, Tim McVeigh has absolutely no relevance to the situation. He didn't shoot up a military base, and he didn't believe in an ideology that allowed people to fly planes into buildings. There's no connection.
Wait, Joey, no, you're not claiming that because Tim McVeigh didn't shoot up 13 people. He killed over 160 people, and he did it aimed it towards the government. In fact, he brought down a building just like the guys in 9/11 did, and he did it because of his ideology.
He was not part of a group, of a jihadi group.
He was part of the militia movement. He was part of the militia movement that was anti-government, and he was an extreme part of it.
I don't see how in the world you can possibly conflate the two scenarios when one is driven by a murderous ideology that's right among us right now, and the other was a lone nutbag.
Wait, Joey, I just want to get this straight. Are you saying Tim McVeigh was not part of a murderous ideology?
Tim McVeigh was a nutball. I don't know of any organization that he subscribed to. I don't know of anybody that counseled him to go out and blow people up. He was just a lone whack job. No different than
You don't think he had any political ideology? Joy, you don't think he had any political ideology? He talked about his ideology, anti-government, militia movement. Terry Nichols was involved, and it was part of the same movement, but he was an extremist in the movement.
What movement did he belong to? What organization?
The anti-government movement of the 1990s, the right-wing anti-government movement. I can't believe you're denying that. You think that?
I want to know more about this movement.
Wait, why did he do it? Why did Tim McVeigh do it? You think? Wasn't he obviously anti-government?
Who the movement is that he belonged to that's just like Islam? Who was the head of the movement?
Right-wing anti-government movement. Are you claiming that Tim McVeigh just randomly walked into the federal building in Oklahoma City and blew it up randomly? What, he didn't like the security guard?
But you're not telling me what his ideology was and what his group was.
I just said it 3 times, Joy. Are you not listening? Right-wing anti-government movement that was very prevalent in the 1990s. Now, I don't claim...
But who else was in this? I don't know who this
The militias! He came out of a militia.
Who are these people?
How much clearer do I have to be? I've now said it 4 times. So now,
well,
how about
I think I would stipulate to the fact that Timothy McVeigh was a nut job who had believed in a certain ideology, but he's not part of a mass movement that's been blowing things up ever since.
So Nidal Malik Hasan is not a nut job, but Tim McVeigh was a nut job?
Tim McVeigh was a soul nut job who acted on his own motivations. He is not, his ideology, as far as I can tell, is not a threat to us at this time.
At this time, because he's already blown up the federal building. So
well,
now
when was the last time that happened? It was somebody who blew up a big building that wasn't a Muslim.
Tim McVeigh and Terry Nichols.
That was 1995.
Oh, okay.
1994, I'm sorry. How many?
That was 1995, and then 2001 was 2001, 6 years later.
Yes, but there's been a lot of attacks perpetrated by radical extreme Muslims between 1995 and now. There's been one by Tim McVeigh in 1995.
So let's do a more direct comparison. Radical Christian ideology.
Oh, are they blowing stuff up too?
Yes, they're killing people. Remember
they killed one.
Oh, they killed Scott Roeder, killed George Tiller. Yes, you agree to that.
Right.
And that's because of his Christian ideology, correct?
And that puts it at something like 30,000 to 1. This is a ridiculous comparison.
Okay, now how about Eric Rudolph? Again, Christian who went after abortion doctors and then did the Olympic bombing. We don't count that either?
I certainly don't see any comparison.
Why not?
Well, how do we even know he's a Christian? Was he running at the time of the murders? He was yelling, Jesus loves me or something. I mean,
I don't know what he was yelling, but I do know that he says that he went after the abortion people because of his Christian beliefs.
Because that's 2 versus like 30,000.
What's the 30,000? Wait a minute. What's the 30,000 inside the United States? We're talking about the inside the United States, right? So look,
I'm talking worldwide.
Oh, you're talking worldwide. How about the George Bush telling...
oh, no. We're going to go to George Bush again. No.
Okay, all right. Look, let's have the conversation. George Bush apparently told Jacques Chirac, this is documented, that he was worried about Gog and Magog, and that's why part of the reason that he invaded Iraq. And Chirac couldn't believe it, and he had to look up what the hell Gog and Magog were. So when hundreds of thousands of people died in Iraq for no goddamn reason... But they don't count either, right? Because the Muslims start all the wars. Did we not start Iraq?
You guys have got to stop talking about Bush at some point. That has to end. Because it's silly. He's not the president.
Wait. We have to stop talking about a guy who was around in 2008 and started a war that killed hundreds of thousands of people. But you can talk about every Muslim attack since the end of time, right? Since the beginning of time.
Right, because Bush is no longer the president, but Muslims are still killing people.
Okay, so now let's come to that, since you were not going to debate George Bush. So you keep saying Muslims. Now, I'm telling you, I'm very worried about extremist Muslims. And you will not see a program, and you can go back and look at our clips on YouTube. You can become a member of our show if you like and go back and listen to our shows.
I will.
You will not find a program that is more dead set against fundamentalist Islam. Okay? The stonings and the women can't drive in Saudi Arabia, and the list goes on.
Genital mutilations.
Absolutely. And no one, I guarantee you, goes more ballistic about that than I do. Okay? But those are extremist Muslims.
So we're really building bridges here.
Okay,
I agree with you.
Okay, exactly. Now, do you believe that's all Muslims?
Well, no, that's absurd.
Okay, that's absurd. So I just want to understand.
That's a huge number of people. So even if only 1% are extremists, we've got a big problem.
Okay,
There's something like 7 million Muslims in this country. So if like 1% are jihadis, I think we have a problem.
If 1% are jihadis, where do you get that?
That's the number that everybody wants. The liberals keep wanting to throw that at me and say only 1%.
No, first of all, Joy, I've never heard that number. I don't know where anybody, liberal or conservative, is getting.
Well, what number could you live with?
1% of all the Muslims in the country are jihadis?
What number could you live with?
Where do you get the number of 1% are jihadis?
Well, I get that from liberals, but what number would you
Which
give
liberals? Name the liberals.
What number would you give them?
I'd give it, so far, I would count the guy who did the fragging in Iraq, who was a Muslim extremist, it turns out. I'd count John Mohammed, the guy who just got executed, the D.C. sniper. And I would count Malik Hasan here. So I'd put it at 3.
Like the Taliban and those guys and Al-Qaeda?
We're talking about inside the United States. You just said the 7 million Muslims,
right? See, this is a
hold on. One thing at a time. Inside the United States, you just said 7 million Muslims, and you wanted a percentage.
No, I said in the world there's 7 million Muslims.
In the world, there's over 1 billion Muslims.
I think it's closer to 7 million, but I'll stipulate it. I'll give you that. I'll let you have 1 billion.
No. It's not. It's a fact. It's not. You can't.
Okay.
I mean, do you
I'll
think,
give you that. I'll stipulate to that.
Okay.
You can
All
have
right.
that one.
Okay. Oh, thank you. I really appreciate it.
But we're talking worldwide, not in the United States.
So no. This is a common trick that conservatives do, which is they say, well, look, even if we say it's as small as 1%, that would be a huge number. But who's saying it's 1%? Inside the U.S., we got 3 guys out of 7 million Muslims.
I told you could pick any percent you want.
Okay, so the percentage is 0.000000001% in the U.S. and worldwide. Again, it would be a tiny, tiny number. We have anywhere between 1.2 to 1.4 billion Muslims in the world, and out of those, there are a couple of thousand Al Qaeda guys, right? And you could add, add some Taliban guys. Add this, add that. What do you still get at?
That way.
How does it not work that way? You tell me.
Well, a lot of people seem to think that Al-Qaeda is sort of like a corporate HQ and everything else is some satellite office that gets directed from HQ, and it's really not the case. That Al-Qaeda is one of the more prestigious offshoots of radical Islam, but it's certainly not the only one. It would be considered kind of a social status thing if you could work with Al-Qaeda and be trained by Al-Qaeda, but there's hundreds and thousands of lone wolves and splinter organizations. I think it's important to get people's heads out of the idea that Al-Qaeda is the central operation, Command Central. It isn't.
All right,
it's one faction that we know about.
Okay, we're talking to conservative commentator Joy Tiz. She's written about this on her website, joytiz.com. So, Joy, you're saying that it's much larger than Al-Qaeda, that it's some sort of significant percentage of Muslims across the world. Now, we disagree on those numbers, but let's get beyond that. We're
building bridges.
Okay, we're building bridges. So you tell me then, what do you want to do with all these Muslims?
That's the real dilemma.
Isn't it?
It's not a simple problem. It's not a simple question.
No, Muslims are not a simple problem.
If you've got a major in the military who's corresponding with a known Al-Qaeda operative, somebody should have taken some action. But again, we're hamstrung by political correctness, and until
so what would be the with the Hassan is super easy. He's throwing out red flags everywhere. He's saying I agree with suicide bombers.
Everyone agrees. I completely agree with you.
So everyone agrees you take action on that. But
you have top-down policies in the military and other organizations saying, "Ooh, hands off the Muslim." Because we're going to get in trouble.
I don't know where you're getting that. Who said hand off the Muslim? You got that?
Did you not hear General Casey's statement on Sunday? I think it was Meet the Press.
That's right. General Casey did not say, "Hey, hands off of extremist Muslims or Hassan."
He said that if we lose diversity, that's worse than the massacre. That tells you what the top-down mentality is in the military.
Okay, so there we have it. So, Joe, you're talking about all Muslims. You're saying, because George Casey said, hey, we value Muslims in the military, Muslim Americans in the military.
No, I never said all Muslims.
Wait a minute. George Casey, that's exactly what he's talking about. He's not talking about Hassan. He said our diversity, having Muslim Americans in the army, in the military,
He never
is
said
important.
a word about Muslims. He said diversity, which to me means all different races, creeds, ethnicities, what the heck ever. Fine. But when you have the Secretary of the Army, General Casey, sitting there in public in a free country saying, "Oh, well, losing diversity would be much worse than a massacre." That's insane logic. It's stupefyingly crazy logic, and it can only come from bad policy.
You're not saying what you really want to do. So do you want to end diversity?
No, I don't want to end diversity. In case that
it might lead to something like this, because it might lead to an extremist. So what do we do? What's your idea? What do we do with these problematic Muslims?
Well, it's not a matter of problematic Muslims. It's a matter of policies from the top down that have to be looked at.
Okay, so what's the policy? What policy do you want to institute against Muslims?
I didn't say much. Now, see, you're being really silly now because you're trying to make me a Muslim hater, and that's not going to work.
No, of course not. So tell me, what do we do with the Muslims? You say it's a problem.
I'm not saying we do anything with the Muslims. I'm saying that we have to change political correctness, and that starts with the liberals, not with the Muslims.
Do what? Okay, you say, all right, get rid of political correctness. So what do you want to do? Political correctness is weighing us down and allowing all this diversity in the army. So what do we do? Get rid of diversity? What do we do? I'm asking.
I don't see how you get from point A to point B with that.
Well, then get there. Tell me, what do you want to do?
Is there no ground for you between anything goes diversity and political correctness and, maybe certain groups, when they display certain behaviors, need to be scrutinized a little more carefully?
Okay, now you're getting at it. Certain groups need to be scrutinized more closely. That's what you're trying to drive at, right?
Well,
we don't want all that diversity.
Yeah, so I would say that we need to be extra cautious.
All right, extra cautious. So how would you be extra cautious, Joy?
The first thing that has to happen, this has to be a top-down thing. This is not something that I can do. This is not something that a sergeant can do. This is something that the Pentagon and the CIA and the FBI have to change.
So what do you want the whole U.S. government to do in scrutinizing who? Who do you want them to scrutinize, and how do you want them to scrutinize?
I want them to stop beating people up if they happen to bring something to your attention as a supervisor that may involve a protected class. Stop telling people they're going to be in trouble if they mention the fact that this guy was Muslim.
But, Joy, that's what you're missing. The problem wasn't that Hassan was a Muslim. There are tens of thousands of Muslims in the military. The problem was that he was an extremist, an idiot, a crazy guy who believed that suicide bombing was the way to go. So you think that it's okay for people to come in and go, hey, I heard this guy was Muslim? Yeah, of course. He doesn't.
No, I say if you hear this guy is Muslim and he gives a lecture saying you should saw off the infidels' heads and pour boiling oil down their throats,
but Joy,
that should be brought to somebody's attention and dealt with, not just transfer him to
Of course, but Joy, you see, you're making a broader argument, and that's the problem. If you say to me, hey, we got to look at extremist Muslims, extremist Christians, extremist whoever, anybody who says we should saw people's heads off, everybody in the country agrees with you. Of course we should look at a guy like that. But you are saying that the diversity is the problem. We have to scrutinize certain people more. So tell me, who do you want to scrutinize and how do you want to scrutinize
diversity is a problem. So you've got diversity in the extreme now. You don't
what
like
does that
extremists.
mean? Hold on. What is diversity in extreme mean?
Diversity in extreme is when the Secretary of the Army sits there on television and says, our diversity is more important than the massacre. That's nuts thinking. And a 5-year-old can understand why that logic makes no sense.
How do we, in your opinion,
You've
Joy,
gotten to the
bring
point
down
where diversity outweighs common sense.
What's the common sense? Spit it out. What's the common sense? What's wrong with diversity?
There's nothing wrong with diversity. What's wrong is extremism in diversity.
But what does that mean, extremism in diversity? Does that mean we have too many different races in the military? Does that mean we have too many of one race or religion in the military? What does extremism in diversity mean? I don't understand.
Extremism means that you are expected to overlook certain behaviors because someone is a member of a certain ethnic group, which is just as bad as discriminating against them because they're in an ethnic group. Giving them a special pass to
Nobody's
be
giving
dangerous
anybody
or
a special
incompetent
pass.
or a threat is
Nobody's
worse
giving
than
anybody a
refusing to give
special
somebody
pass.
a promotion because of their ethnicity. How is that any different?
And nobody's giving anyone a free pass. And you know what? People.
How did Hassan get where he was? He got nothing but free. He wasn't even a good doctor.
Show me something where it says, you know what? Hey, this guy looks like he's going to cut people's heads off or kill people. But since he's Muslim, we handed him a free pass.
The FBI actually said that this morning.
All right.
If you Google it, I bet you'll find the quote. They said,
Joy, I want you to email it to me because you have that quote, right? So you're going to email it to me. And then if the quote exists, I'm going to come on the air tomorrow and say, okay, FBI said we gave the guy a free pass because he was Muslim.
The words were, we would be crucified.
Crucified? If pointing out that somebody's might be interested in killing people. I don't, that's not true.
Yes, it's crazy over there, isn't it?
All right. Joy, bottom line is, you're saying, if I've got this right, hey, don't give people a free pass if they're saying they're going to murder people. I couldn't agree more. And then you're saying,
to that.
Okay, so we all agree on that. And so now, on the other hand, you haven't said at all what else we should do. Okay? And if you say there is nothing else, that we just got to look out for murderers, I agree with you. Okay?
No, I don't. I think there's more that has to be done.
Then will you, for the love of God, tell me what more has to be done?
Well, let's see if the FBI and the DOJ and everybody else actually investigate this case the way it should be. My hunch is that they won't.
See, you won't say it because
I've already told you 10 million times. It has to be a top-down policy change in the military.
What is the policy change? You keep saying top-down, but you won't say it because you know why? You're embarrassed to say it. You say you think we should scrutinize Muslims more because Muslims, some Muslims do terrorism throughout the world, so we should scrutinize Muslims in the military. Isn't that right?
I didn't say anything even remotely close to that, but I think if you have a Muslim who's friends and worshiping in a mosque that's run by Al-Qaeda, I think you better scrutinize him a little bit more carefully.
So everybody that was in the mosque, that guy that's now in Yemen should be scrutinized more closely, right?
Well, if they're going to have access to a military base, you betcha.
Okay, so then you're with me that we're going to go scrutinize every church that Scott Roeder and Eric Rudolph were in, right?
If you would like to do that, you're free to do that. I don't have a problem with that. I don't think you're going to find anything of great interest. But
no, of course, because they're Christian. Right.
But those churches are also not owned and operated by the Saudis, as most mosques are here.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty common knowledge.
Oh, it is pretty common knowledge?
You got to do some Googling.
Okay, yeah. Well, since I grew up a Muslim, that takes me by surprise because I don't think any of the mosques that the Turks were going to were funded by Saudis. They don't particularly like each other.
That's correct. You're right about that. But I think
Okay.
if you look at some of the large city mosques, you're going to find out that there is a tremendous amount of Saudi control. Most of the money came through the Muslim Brotherhood, which is now obviously CARE.
Joy, we've gone way too long, and that's my bad. But I'm going to ask you one last thing. So, why in the beginning did you bring up all that stuff about Muslims and terrorists? Like, what was? Because if you're now saying that you don't think we should do anything with Muslims in the military, except look out for murderers, which of course everyone agrees to. So, why did you bring up all that stuff about how Muslims do more terrorism? What was the point of that?
Well, because you brought up the fact that there was a jihadi massacre at Fort Hood. And you tried to conflate it with a couple of lone whack jobs who happened to be Christian and not part of any kind of an organized ideology, and I don't think that's correct.
So what's
I
the
think
conclusion you draw
in fact,
from
if you go back to Steve Emerson's research, he will tell you that the Muslims are winning, extremist Muslims are winning 1,000 to 1 against any other group in the world as far as terrorist acts go.
Yeah, I saw you quoted this Emerson character. I don't know who he is, but 1,000 to 1 is absurd. If you count the Tamil Tigers, that alone puts you at nowhere near 1,000 to 1. They're not Muslim, and they've done an enormous amount of terrorism over the last decade, 2 decades, let alone if you include the Basque. I don't know where he gets that 1,000 to 1 number. It's like the people love to throw around these numbers. 1,000 to 1 Muslims are worse. The 1% of Muslims, if that was true, how terrible that would be. But it's not true. All right. Okay. So listen, you go on scrutinizing, and we agree that certainly that if there are extremists from any religion, we should look into it. And apparently you agree with me that we shouldn't target Muslims in the military. So, look, we found some agreement, right, George?
Well, I think extremists who have the potential to be dangerous, who've shown some warning signs that they're dangerous or they're associating with people that we know are terrorists, I think that deserves some scrutiny, yes.
All right. Joy Tiz from joytiz.com. We appreciate you coming on the Young Turks and having a spirited discussion.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Young Turks.